Merci à vous tous pour vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui pour notre pause Café Virtuel CDÉNÉ, alors que nous lançons la Semaine de la petite et moyenne entreprise 2020. Je m'appelle André Leblanc et je suis le gestionnaire des services en affaires et en entrepreneuriat du Conseil de développement économique de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual coffee break, CDÉNÉ. As we kick off Small Business Week 2020, my name is André Leblanc, and I manage the Small Business Entrepreneurship Team for le Conseil de développement économique de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Cette année, le thème de la 41e Semaine de la petite et moyenne entreprise est particulièrement adapté aux conditions qui ont touché tous les propriétaires d'entreprises rurales en Nouvelle-Écosse. Entreprenons l'avenir. This year, the 41st Small Business Week's theme is particularly fitting of the conditions that have impacted all rural Nova Scotian business owners, forging the way forward. Les entrepreneurs ruraux ont toujours fait preuve d'innovation et de résilience, et pendant cette crise sans précédent, ils continuent de s'adapter et de se positionner pour réussir. Ça étant dit, l'un des secteurs les plus durement touchés a été celui de la restauration, les restaurants. Aujourd'hui, nous voudrions dire aux entrepreneurs du secteur de restauration et des services de restauration que nous vous remercions pour votre persévérance dans ces temps difficiles. Rural entrepreneurs have always been innovative and resilient, and during this unprecedented crisis, they continue to adapt and position themselves to succeed. That being said, one of the hardest sectors has been the food service industry. Today, we would like to say to restaurant and food service operators, thank you for your perseverance in these challenging times. La Semaine des petites et moyennes entreprises a pour but de célébrer la contribution des petites entreprises dans nos communautés et ça nous rappelle une fois de plus à quel point elles sont importantes. Environ 99% des entreprises au Canada sont des petites entreprises et cela souligne une fois de plus l'importante contribution apportée à la durabilité de nos économies rurales. Cela étant dit, je voudrais vous présenter Luc Erjavec, vice-président du Canada Atlantique de Restaurant Canada, un grand défenseur des entreprises et porte-parole de l'industrie. Small Business Week is about celebrating the contribution of small businesses in our communities. And again, we are reminded of how important they are. Approximately 99% of businesses in Canada are small businesses. And this highlights again the important contribution made to the sustainability of our rural economies. With that being said, I would like to introduce Luc Erjavec, Vice President, Atlantic Canada for Restaurants Canada, a leading business advocate and industry spokesperson. Luc, I'd like to pass it off to you.
Oh, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to join you today. I wish I was there in Digby County. I actually grew up in Weymouth and have spent a lot of my life running the roads of Clare and Digby. So it's such a pleasure to speak with you today. As I am Vice President Atlantic for Restaurants Canada. For those of you who don't know what Restaurants Canada is, we're Canada's largest hospitality association. We represent the owners and the operators of Canada's restaurants, bars, hotels, pubs, institutional caterers, the full gamut of the industry. Our members control somewhere between 35 and 40,000 restaurants, establishments across the nation. We do a lot of things. A big part of our focus is advocacy on behalf of the industry, and that's really my main job in Atlantic Canada. I cover the 4 provinces, lobbying governments to try to bring forward policies that help the restaurants. We do a lot of most industry research, which you'll see a lot of it today. We have a senior economist who is very well known and works closely with the Bank of Canada and Statistics Canada and other organizations in terms of what's going on in food service industry. And lastly, we also do, we provide tangible value to our members through our group buying programs. We own a company called GroupX, which we give independent restaurants discounts on, Pepsi, food, credit card rates, chemicals, bread, linens, whatever. So it really is, it's a group buying program that helps members, compete and become sustainable. And we're particularly pleased, as times got tough for our restaurants the last 6 months, our GroupX organization has really stepped forward and brought forward new programs in terms of plexiglass and PPE and cleaners to help our members save some money as they try to get through this. So if you have any operators, GroupX is free to Restaurants Canada members. Also, most recently in Nova Scotia, I've been very involved. I actually wrote the operating guidelines that most restaurants in the province use to operate during the COVID crisis. And, that put together with best practices nationally, internationally, and what some of our big brand members have done, and then tapped into the local Nova Scotia Association, and we published that together. And I think most restaurants use that. I have a lot of data here today. It's probably about 45 minutes. As I said, what I'm presenting today is I've stolen a presentation that our senior economist did just a couple days ago on COVID. So it was really timely that I'm able to meet with you today. So I don't care. I'm not sure how you want to do it. If you can jump in and ask questions, or it's probably a little more free flowing if you want to do that way. And as I said, there's a lot of data. It's about 45 minutes worth. And I'm happy to forward a PDF of the slides for your information as you want. So, what we're going to, I'll go on to my sharing of the screen here. 2 seconds here. Here we go. Okay, so you can all see that, I hope. Okay, so what I'll do today is I'll review the impact COVID is having on the food service industry, how operators are pivoting to this new reality, and have a look at the future for our industry. For today's presentation, we'll be pulling data from the 2020 food service facts, but because the situation is evolving rapidly, I'll also include data from our most recent operator surveys, consumer surveys Restaurants Canada has conducted with Angus Reid, as well as an updated forecast for food service sales for the remainder of 2020 right up to 2022. Before I go into today's presentation, I'd like to take a moment to reminisce about the past. It's important to remind ourselves where the industry was before COVID hit. In the past decade, the restaurant industry was the fastest growing major industry in Canada, faster than any other high profile industries, such as finance, transportation, agriculture, oil, fishing, mining. We were the fastest industry. At the end of 2019, we had grown to about 93 billion in sales, which is more than double the size it was in 2000. And before COVID, we were on track to surpass 100 billion in sales from 2020. Just as a side note, I'm going to be using national data just because of the size of some of the samples. It's going to be a little more accurate. But from what we've seen in all our surveying in the data, it's Nova Scotia is very consistent with the rest of with the national data. How quickly things have changed from where we were, where we are right now, and what could have been. It's important to note that even though we experienced strong aggregate sales, it was a different story at the operator level. In recent years, the average unit volume for restaurants has slowed from more than 2% real growth in 2016 and 17 to a slight decline in 2018, followed by a modest increase in 2019. This is largely due to higher menu prices, a slowdown in consumer traffic, and a much more competitive landscape. And while nominal sales increased over this time frame, there was a corresponding increase in operator costs. So we look ahead to 2020 with optimism, and we were so hopeful 2020 was going to be a great year. With the hope that this would be our best year yet, just like it says on the cover of this daily 2020 planner. Of course, we all know how things turned out, and by the middle of April, we were pretty much throwing our daily planners out of the window. But instead of being lost, the food service industry basically fell off a cliff and broke both legs. And that cliff is food service sales. No province was unscathed. With record sales declines across the country, we saw year-over-year declines of 50% in PEI, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, and declines of more than 60% in Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, as these had the highest number of cases. Not all segments were impacted equally, however. Quick service restaurant sales fell by 41% in April as they relied heavily on takeout and delivery. In fact, nearly half of all sales at quick service restaurants in April came from drive-thrus. For full-service restaurants and bars, the vast majority were temporarily closed and provided limited takeout and delivery. As a result, sales at full-service restaurants plummeted by 78%, and bars are down a shocking 50%. Sorry, bars are down a shocking 91%. In fact, on-premise orders at restaurants dropped to just 4% of total sales in April, after accounting for more than half of total restaurant sales in 2019. I'm off one slide. You have to excuse me. According to Angus Reid data, prior to COVID, 51% of Canadians visited a quick service restaurant at least once a week, and 31% visited a table service restaurant. In the past 4 months, so from May through August, those numbers fell to 35% at quick service restaurants and just 14% at table service restaurants. For table service restaurants, this represents 5.2 million fewer visits at least once a week. As a result of the dramatic decline in sales, the restaurant and accommodation industry was the hardest hit of any industry when it came to job losses. Incredibly, employment in the food service industry plummeted to levels we haven't seen since the early 1980s. In April, 817,000 food service workers were either laid off or still employed but not working any hours. This represents 2/3 of a total of 1.2 million employees. Now, in the past 4 months, employment in Canada's food service industry has regained 400,000 jobs from where it was in April, yet the food service industry has the furthest way to go to return to pre-COVID levels. In August, employment in the restaurant and hospitality industry was 260,000 jobs below pre-COVID levels in February. This represents by far the largest job loss gap of any industry. As a percentage of employment, food service and hospitality was 21% below pre-COVID levels, while all other industries are down an average of 5%. In some cases, a few industries are just 1% below pre-COVID levels. Clearly, between the decline in sales and the steep job losses, the restaurant industry has a long way to recover. It has been devastating, it has been unprecedented, and definitely there has been a lot of carnage. I sort of like the outdoors and you know, for today's webinar, I'll apply 4 wilderness survival guidelines from survival experts as a metaphor for what's happening in today's industry. These are, what is your first priority? What is your survival kit? What is your food situation? And stay warm and dry. Let's be clear, there's no playbook for the situation like COVID, but I'll use these survival guidelines as a general theme throughout the rest of today's presentation to get you thinking about your business and how to respond and adapt. Let's begin with the first priority. In the wilderness, generally speaking, it's water. You can go for weeks with very little food, but you can only survive a couple of days if you don't have any water. Similarly, if a business can only go so long without bringing in any money, your first priority for a restaurant, besides the health and safety of your guests and staff, is liquidity and cash flow. Because without cash coming in, your business won't survive. According to a study by JP Morgan Chase in 2015, the average restaurant in the United States can only go 16 days without bringing in any money before it is forced to go out of business. By way of comparison, the median small business has an average of 27 buffer days. While we've never been able to get data like this in Canada, I suspect it'd be very similar. But what this does show is how fragile the financial situation is for food service operators. And this was before COVID-19. Throughout this crisis, one of the biggest challenges is the operators not having enough money to pay rent, vendors, business taxes, or make payroll. This is because nearly all restaurants are seeing lower same-store sales relative to last year. This chart shows percentage of operators that reported higher, lower, or flat same-store sales on a year-over-year basis. Even in the first 2 weeks of February, 40% of restaurants reported lower same-store sales, outnumbering those with higher sales. And worse, this was a continuation of a trend we saw throughout 2019 and is largely due to rising menu prices and high household debt. By the end of March, a stunning 96% of restaurants reported lower same-store sales as social distancing measures were implemented across the country. Even though the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases declined during the summer, and with warm weather and patio season, still 90% of restaurants reported lower same-store sales in July and August. So has there been any improvement in food service sales since April? This chart shows the decline in the seasonally adjusted food service sales compared to pre-COVID levels of February. So these are not year-over-year growth rates, but how the industry performed relative to February, which, as we all know, is a relatively slow time for the restaurant industry. For example, in April, sales were down 63% compared to pre-COVID levels. In May, the decline was 51% of February sales, and of July, sales were down to 27% of February levels. By segment, quick service restaurants have seen the fastest recovery as sales were down 13% in July compared to February. Meanwhile, sales at full service restaurants are down 34%, with bars are still down 50%. By way of comparison, overall retail sales, the blue line, have actually returned to pre-COVID-19 levels in June and July, or even 1% above February levels. As you'll remember, grocery stores saw huge spikes of sales in April, and in July remained 7% above February sales levels. These different trajectories in sales are driven by consumer perceptions about the various channels and venues. A new survey conducted in mid-September by Angus Reid for Restaurants Canada, we see which venues Canadians are most comfortable and least comfortable with visiting. At the top, 95% Canadians are comfortable going out to a grocery store, and 86% said they would be comfortable visiting a brick and mortar retail store. In contrast, 72% of Canadians are comfortable visiting restaurants, while 28% would avoid them. There's some strong, interesting regional differences, however. In the prairies and Atlantic Canada, just 20% would avoid a restaurant versus more than 30% in Ontario and Quebec. Still, we've seen a steady increase in the share that feel comfortable going out to a restaurant over the past 5 months. Back in August, 66% of Canadians were comfortable visiting restaurants. So we've seen a 6% jump in a few months. If we go all the way back to April, just 26% of Canadians were comfortable visiting a restaurant back then. As for bars, 75% of Canadians would currently avoid them. Again, these survey results were from a few weeks ago. And as you know, things can change quickly. Given the increase in COVID-19 cases in several jurisdictions across Canada in recent weeks, we'll likely see a bit of a pullback in the share of Canadians that are comfortable visiting restaurants and bars. At this point, it's too soon to tell how much of an impact this will have on the industry. But I can tell you from just anecdotally, the few cases in Moncton, I've had a number of calls from operators in the Moncton area who said sales have declined dramatically over the past week or two since we had that recent outbreak. The survey also looked more closely at the various restaurant channels. In mid-September, the vast majority of Canadians were very comfortable visiting a restaurant for off-premise transactions, with 94% of Canadians saying they have or would have a restaurant for takeout and 88% saying they'd order through a drive-through. In the next tier, 76% have or would dine on a patio at a full-service restaurant, and 66% would at a quick-service restaurant. After that, 65% would dine indoors at a full-service restaurant, but just under half of Canadians would dine indoors at a quick-service restaurant. Finally, 44% would eat in a food court of a mall, and just 25% would go to a bar. Keeping in mind, these results were from mid-September, so the results may have changed due to an increase in cases in a number of jurisdictions. With cooler weathers and patios closing, the big question becomes, will your guests pivot to takeout and delivery or dine indoors during the autumn? These survey results suggest Canadians may be apprehensive about dining indoors in the autumn, as they prefer patios to indoors during the summer. Our own survey of food service operators found that 67% of full-service restaurants are worried about their sales in the autumn because of the closure of patio and guests not dining indoors. So clearly, having some form of takeout and delivery will be essential to going forward in case there is a big jump in COVID cases. For the next two slides, I want to focus on one particular category, eating indoors in a traditional restaurant. So for those that are comfortable going out to eat at a traditional full-service restaurant, we asked what would convince them to go dine in more often. Wow, it's great to see that 44% of Canadians would go out more often in order to help support their local restaurant. So that is great to see. Perhaps your marketing can talk about the emotional connection with restaurants. One of the things that people missed most about going to restaurants during the lockdown is spending time with family and friends. 42%, however, will wait until there is a vaccine. This share rises to 50% or more in British Columbia and Ontario. So this is going to be a challenge. Nearly 4 in 10 would go out more often if they have more disposable income. In these uncertain times, people are worried about their household financing and job security, especially for young people. More health and safety can never be enough. It's important to note that in this survey, 87% of Canadians said restaurants are doing a good job keeping guests safe. Still, it's an important reminder that you need to make your health and safety measures obvious and visible to help reassure your guests. So why won't your guests go out? Not surprisingly, it's the perception of safety. Canadians are worried that staff or guests have COVID. They don't feel comfortable in an indoor setting or that guests won't social distance. So again, in any of your marketing, highlight what your food service operation is doing, which would potentially convince some of these to come in. Again, nearly 4 in 10 are waiting for a vaccine, so this group will be hard to convince. 35 to 54-year-olds are most budget conscious, so if this is your clientele, maybe market deals and limited time offers can bring them in. With a decline in sales, plus still having to pay a number of operating expenses and fixed costs, 33% of quick service restaurants and 45% of full service restaurants are operating at a loss by the end of August. On a positive note, we're seeing an improvement compared to June. At the end of June, 51% of quick service restaurants were operating at a loss and 65% of full service restaurants were operating at a loss. Still, a sizable 25% of restaurants are just breaking even. With 43% of quick service restaurants making a profit and just 31% of full service restaurants are making a profit. Of those that are operating at a loss, it will take 12 months or longer for the vast majority of quick service and full service restaurants to return to profitability. Unfortunately, for some operators, many of these businesses won't recover enough without additional support and will have to close down permanently. According to research by Angus Reid, 55% of Canadians are aware of a restaurant in the community that has permanently closed. With the increase in COVID cases and restaurants being forced to shut down in several jurisdictions, we can expect to see more restaurants close permanently. Already, we estimate that roughly 10 to 12% of restaurants have permanently closed due to COVID as of the end of August. That's nearly 10,000 restaurants across the country. I want to wrap up this section with a few quick survival tips. Cash flow pays the bills and is the key indicator of businesses' financial health. Therefore, it's vitally important to reduce costs as much as possible. If there's a time to practice running a lean business, now's the time. One way is to work with your partners and find a way to reduce expenses. It's often easier to cut variable costs than fixed costs, so tackle those first. Literally cut anything you don't need. Just remember, everyone else is in a tight spot too. Second, prioritize cash flow, such as offering exclusive discounts to existing customers. Offering the right discount at the right time with a compelling exclusive messaging will help you boost sales, generate cash, and promote customer loyalty. Remember those budget-conscious 35 to 54-year-olds that I spoke about earlier. Gift cards are another way, a low-cost way to get more cash in the door right away without having to spend cash on ingredients and labor to make the meals. Third, empower your team with transparency. Be transparent about your restaurant's metrics and what you need to achieve those goals. It gives the entire business a shared sense of mission and promotes teamwork. You may get some great ideas from your staff as well. In any survival situation, you need a reliable survival kit. For restaurant operators, part of that kit includes federal government programs that offer financial assistance. This will not be enough, as you will also need to rely on your own resourcefulness to adapt to the new normal. We'll talk about all that in this next session. At the beginning of this presentation, I said that this was a rescue operation. As a result, the federal and provincial governments have come forward with several programs in order to help businesses. Of the 3 federal programs, the wage subsidy is the most helpful, according to our survey, with 85% of restaurant operators saying it was extremely or very useful to their businesses. 56% of operators said the Canada Emergency Business Account was helpful to their business, although 16% said they did not apply for it. As for the rent subsidy program, opinions are mixed, with just 37% saying it was extremely or very helpful. In contrast, 20% said it was not helpful, and 37% said it was not applicable to them or the landlord did not apply. We are very pleased with the recent announcements of the extension of the wage subsidy. It's something we've been working on federally, as well as a new rental program, which details should be announced soon. But I think a key part of that program is the money is going to go directly to the tenant for mortgage payments or rent payments. Going forward, Restaurants Canada will continue to actively work with government in delivering on initiatives that will support the survival of our industry. And this ongoing financial assistance will be a vital lifeline to a majority of restaurant operators. In a survey Restaurants Canada conducted about 3 weeks ago, 63% of food service operators said their business requires additional financial support from government beyond what is currently available in order to survive. This was due to the continued sharp decline in sales, as well as to pay employees and other expenses. Another 17% said they were not sure and don't know, but with the growing number of COVID cases, I'd expect more restaurants will require financial assistance. For those that said they require additional funding, this isn't just for rent and other fixed costs, but also to pay employees, to pay business taxes, to pay vendors, to pay for PPE and more. A continuation of these government programs will help save restaurants from closing down and also save tens of thousands of food service jobs. That's why at Restaurants Canada, we've made this a priority. This chart shows why these programs are so important. For those that said they require additional support, 62% said they would permanently close in the next 6 months if they don't receive support. So that's not 62% of all restaurants, but 62% of those that said they needed support. So we are in a critical phase right now. The restaurant industry can't rely solely on government support, especially in these uncertain times. Sometimes in a survival situation, you need to focus on self-rescue. Necessity can be the mother of all invention, and you need to choose a new path forward. In this section, I'll talk about how restaurant operators are coming up with new ways to pivot their business to bring in more customers. Here is just one example of creativity. Some restaurants are using mannequins to make their restaurant feel a little more full while operating at a reduced capacity. Restaurants would also strategically place these mannequins in their establishments to help customers maintain space and socially distance. Now, you don't have to go to this extreme, but the food service industry has to continually find new ways to pivot their business because we have nothing to lose at this point. In a survey of restaurant operators in April and May, we found that restaurants quickly pivot to contactless payment, contactless pickup, and curbside pickup. When table service restaurants had their on-premise dining closed down, a number of these operators began to offer delivery for the first time and seeing quite a bit of success from that. This includes the delivery of alcohol for the first time. If you look at just the licensed establishments, 74% of table service restaurants or restaurant bars added beverage alcohol as part of their takeout and delivery offerings. Meal kits were another one of the most innovative changes made during the pandemic, as well as the adding of groceries. It's interesting because over the years, we've seen a blurring of the lines between retail food and food service, with retailers moving towards a food service model with restaurants and prepared foods. Now we see that pendulum swinging in the other direction, with restaurants now offering more grocery and retail options. So food service operators can use meal kits and groceries as an opportunity to release signature dishes, sauces, or snacks through a new channel to improve sales and boost your brand reach. As part of our Angus Reid survey, we asked Canadians to rank the most important factors in selecting a restaurant. In the past, when we've asked this question, the typical response was convenience, value, and craveability. And by craveability, I mean choosing a restaurant for a specific menu item the restaurant's known for. So how have things changed since COVID? It was almost a tie for first, but it's interesting to note that high quality food just barely surpass safe and clean environment as a number one. Really, Canadians are not choosing high quality food over safe and clean environment. They're choosing high quality food and safe and clean environment. This was followed by value and choosing a restaurant for a specific menu item. So rising to the top of the list was high quality food safety, but look how far down the list convenience is. And convenience for years has been a driver of why people are going to restaurants. It will be interesting once there's a vaccine if high quality food and health and safety remain the top two factors, or will Canadians return to their old habits again to have a hunch these are here to stay. Throughout today's presentation, I mentioned health and safety a lot. So what do Canadians want to see at restaurants when it comes to health and safety measures? Well, it turns out they want to see everything. Apart from socially distanced tables, a lot of other factors were ranked first and most important, such as staff wearing masks and gloves, socially distanced common areas, sanitizers at every table, and so on. And as I said before, you need to make your health and safety measures obvious and visible to help you reassure your guests. When it comes to health and safety, transparency has never been more important than it is now. It is also something that you can be creative with them when talking to your guests. A former chair of Restaurants Canada, Donna Dewar from Mildred's Temple Kitchen, has used Instagram Live to conduct cooking classes during the crisis. This is a great way to engage your guests and keep the brand alive. Now, in one episode, she showed how the restaurant works behind the scenes, staff wearing masks, being socially distanced, hand wash timing, and how tables are socially distanced to keep guests safe. She had such a great response by this. Being transparent with guests, it really shows what you're doing. As discussed earlier in this presentation, we've seen a dramatic decline in sales at restaurants. When we look at the day part, it's primarily the morning meals and lunches reporting the largest declines. So with many people working remotely, staying closer to home, or not traveling as much, they aren't grabbing their morning coffee and snacks on their way to work. These declines are felt at both quick service and full service restaurants, although declines at quick service restaurants are smaller than the full service restaurants. Thinking about your own business, it'll be critical for you to find the best way to serve your customers in their home settings, especially in the post-COVID era. For example, some companies that used to cater corporate events prior to COVID have pivoted to cooking and delivering healthy, safe, and affordable family-style meals to people's homes. There are opportunities out there. One of the biggest trends throughout the past 6 months is a rise in delivery. Even before COVID, delivery sales had jumped 85% between 2016 and 2019. Meanwhile, on-premise sales rose by just 3% during that time frame. In 2019, delivery grew to more than $4 billion in sales, with $2.1 billion in sales at quick service restaurants and $2 billion in sales at full service restaurants. This is attributed to a lot of the millennials taking over the market and the use of technology. Before COVID-19, delivery would account for less than 10% of sales at restaurants. In April 2020, that share jumped to 24% of sales at quick service restaurants and 28% of sales at full service restaurants. As a result of greater demand for delivery, a survey of food service operators by Restaurants Canada found in July that 55% of quick service restaurants and 49% of full service restaurants offer deliveries through third-party aggregators. As indoor dining has increased, we've seen a bit of a pullback in the delivery market share, but it hasn't returned to pre-COVID levels, and it's unlikely that it ever will. So the challenge for restaurants is how to create that same consumer engagement that you had inside your restaurant and now move it to an online platform because delivery is here to stay. That goes back to Donna's Instagram cooking classes, for example, of a way to create that engagement. One area where COVID-19 has accelerated the growth is in ghost kitchens. These are virtual kitchens with no storefront that are just designed for delivery. It helps reduce overhead and requires fewer staff. One of the big questions, though, is would Canadians want to order from a ghost kitchen, or do they prefer to order delivery from a traditional restaurant? A survey of Canadians found that 55% said they'd be interested in ordering food for delivery from a ghost kitchen. This figure rises to 72% for those 18 to 34 years of age. Currently, just 4% of restaurant operators surveyed operate a ghost kitchen, but this share is expected to grow to 12% over the next 2 years. While there isn't much interest in tech-forward delivery by older Canadians, younger consumers are significantly more interested in trying these. And this is just kind of fun to see what some of the future holds. 55% of 18 to 34-year-olds said they'd order delivery from a self-driving car, 50% from an automated robot, and 48% would order through Amazon Electra. So if you're looking to bring younger clientele, new technology and cutting-edge services like these could help draw younger diners. Remember, today's youth and young adults interact with the world through their phones. So if you want to find them, this is where you need to be. Finally, you have control over your pricing. Right now, restaurants are expected to raise their menus by an average of 3.6% over the next 12 months. 20% said they'll raise their menu prices by more than 5%, and because of all the economic uncertainty, another 21% are unsure. Interestingly, one trend that we are seeing from some operators is that when people eat out, they are spending more than average, ordering more expensive cuts, eating foie gras, drinking higher end alcohol. So there may be some room to increase your menu prices strategically. As part of Restaurants Canada Recovery Series, there was an excellent webinar called Engineering Your Menu for Profits by the Group 15 group that can help in this area. I'll show you the link for this webinar at the end. So here are a few quick survival tips from this section. Don't compromise. Don't compromise on your service or your quality. You may have changed to a single-ply toilet paper to save money, but don't skimp on the butter that makes your signature dish. We know that from Angus Reid's survey, the importance of high-quality food. This pandemic also provides an opportunity to reset and reprioritize the consumer with excellent service. Don't stop innovating. We see this innovation as an increasing share of the restaurants that are offering delivery, meal kits, groceries, and expanding into ghost kitchens. Now, in the last section, I talked about transparency with staff. Sometimes the best ideas for change and innovation can come from your staff. I spoke with an operator and she said brunch was not something they had started out with, but it kept them going during this tough time, and it's now become a brand standard for them. The idea didn't come from management, but it came from a staff meeting. So talk to your staff for ideas. Finally, if you're ever lost in the woods, you need to be able to signal for help or have a loud whistle so people can find you. You need to be noisy. For restaurants, that means you need to keep the gas on marketing. Again, this just doesn't have to be traditional marketing, but also leveraging all social media platforms such as Instagram and TikTok. So whether you're stranded in the wilderness or a restaurant operator, it's important to know what's your food situation. Just like when you're in the wilderness, it's critically important for your survival as a restaurant operator to find the right food to put on the menu. In a survival situation, one thing you can eat with relatively safety are grasshoppers and most other insects, and apparently scorpions are pretty good. Yet according to a survey of Canadians, only 3% of Canadians are extremely or very interested in ordering insects from a restaurant. So what is popular on the menu of restaurants? At the beginning of 2020, 476 professional chefs participated in Restaurants Canada Chef Survey. They rated a variety of menu items and cooking methods as either hot trend or up and coming. And here are the trends for 2020. Number one for the first time is plant-based burgers and sausages. We've seen exponential growth in this category, especially with the huge popularity of the Beyond Meat products. And it was recently announced that an Impossible Burger is now coming to Canada. Going through the list, we can see very similar items such as meatless vegetarian entrees at number 5, plant-based proteins at number 6, which are culinary themes, so not referencing anything specific. So there's a lot of popularity for these items, and it's not just from traditional vegetarians and vegans. In fact, 34% of Canadians said they are likely to try plant-based meat alternatives. Next is fermented foods, which includes tempeh, miso, and kimchi. We've already seen an increase in these healthy menu items in recent years. Rounding out the top 3 is food smoking. This isn't just smoking meat, but can also include smoking vegetables and cheese. Of course, this survey was conducted before COVID, so we reached out to a number of chefs to ask, are there any trends still valid, or has the world changed since then? A lot of chefs said that zero waste cooking rises to the top, as it has the potential to help reduce both food and labor costs. As stated earlier, we are seeing a focus on downsizing menu complexity and maximizing each ingredient to increase efficiency. So zero waste cooking can help eliminate waste and maximize profits. So what are the up and coming trends? For the first time, plant-based desserts showed up as a number 1 up-and-comer. Chefs can be very creative by using alternative ingredients like tahini, coconut oil, pumpkin puree, and flaxseed instead of butter and eggs to create a unique texture and flavor. Plus, there's the added benefit of more fiber and less sugar. It's really exciting to explore combinations like beet and chocolate, cauliflower and caramelized white chocolate, pumpkin yogurt desserts. Seacouterie is also new to the list, an alternative to the usual meat charcuterie offering but using seafood. Once again, we see food waste reduction. New to the list this year is vegetable carb substitutes. We're seeing this on menus as during the summer, Chipotle tested cilantro, lime, cauliflower rice at 55 restaurants in Denver and throughout Wisconsin. So it's becoming more mainstream. Prior to the crisis, the sale of alcohol beverages accounted for 20% of revenue at full-service restaurants and 67% of revenue at drinking places. One of the biggest trends we've seen in the food service industry in recent years is the decline of alcohol orders from young people. We've seen fewer young people going out to drink, and when they do, they are going out less often. This has been especially true among young men. One of the key trends of 2019 that will carry over into 2020 and beyond is the loss of market share of alcohol volume at bars. It's likely this is due to the growth of the cannabis industry. Cannabis use is highest among young males, and it seems to motivate them to stay home. The challenge for bars is drawing people out more when they might rather stay home. Looking at the future, 23% of Canadians said they're interested in trying lab-grown meat. Sometimes called motherless meat or clean meat is stem cells taken from an animal muscle tissue and grown in vitro. It's ethical, uses less water, less land, and not as energy intensive. Every year, we are one step closer, with estimates that we will see it on store shelves as early as 2022, and we could see it on a menu soon too. We are even hearing about some larger chains that are currently testing lab-grown meat using 3D technology. Wow, what a change. In summary, Canadians continue to be mindful about the environment. some of the most popular menu trends focus on plant-based, eating less meat, zero waste, and eco-friendly packaging. This is changing menus across the country. Second, our chef survey shows that claims involving house-made, locally sourced, free range, and sustainability have maintained their popularity and recognition among both guests and chefs. Finally, food waste is an area that cannot be overemphasized in terms of importance, especially during these challenging times. Keeping track and monitoring food waste is critical to understanding how well you're doing from week to week. It also forces chefs to get creative with their menu and utilizing an ingredient in multiple recipes as one way to reduce food costs. If you're lost or injured in the wilderness, it's generally a good idea to create a safe and warm camp and wait to help to arrive, especially because weather conditions can change rapidly. Likewise, your restaurant needs to prepare for what is coming. So this last section will focus on our forecasts for food service industry sales. We're certainly in uncharted water when it comes to economic forecasting. Last year, we were forecasting that the commercial food service sales would increase by 3.8% to $78 billion in 2020. This figure is not including non-commercial sales. Given this uncertainty, Restaurants Canada released an initial forecast in May, which provided 3 possible forecasts for food service sales. All the percentages here show the declines in sales in 2020 compared to 2019. Scenario 1 was the most optimistic scenario, where the pent-up consumer demand would lead to faster recovery on food service sales. In this scenario, annual sales in 2020 would decline by 24% compared to 2019. In the second scenario, consumers would be more cautious about returning to restaurants and bars once containment measures are lifted. Here, sales are forecast to decline by 37% compared to 2019. Finally, the most pessimistic scenario is the third scenario, where consumers are reluctant to dine out at food service establishments. As a result, the decline in food service sales is forecast to be minus 48% in 2020. Based on the data from Statistics Canada in August, we are seeing trending right in the middle of scenario 1 and 2. However, if we continue to see significant lockdowns like we're seeing in Quebec and Ontario, the annual decline will be somewhere between 2 and 3. A month ago, we released an updated forecast for commercial food service sales by segment for the remainder of 2020 that goes to 2022. The blue line is where we expect food service sales to be. Again, this excludes non-commercial sales. Based on the latest Restaurants Canada data, we now forecast that commercial food service sales in 2020 will decline by 30.8%, so halfway between scenarios 1 and 2 from the previous slide. In 2021, commercial food service sales are forecast to bounce back with 31.6% increase, but annual sales will remain below pre-COVID levels. It's not to 2022 that sales will be back to 2019 levels. And what does this mean for the various food service segments? Quick service restaurant sales are forecast to decrease by 13% in 2020 compared to 2019. And because they didn't see as big of a decline, they are forecast to return to pre-COVID levels in 2021. In contrast, sales at full service restaurants are forecast to fall by 42.5% in 2020 and won't return to pre-COVID levels until 2022. This is due to the decline in tourists, drop-off in business dining, and some consumers being reluctant to dine in, as we saw before. As part of our Angus Reid survey, we asked how long it will take before Canadians feel comfortable going out to a table service restaurant with friends and family on a regular basis. 31% said they are comfortable now, but that number isn't going to climb much higher over the remainder of 2020. Even by the first half of 2021, just 46% of Canadians said they'd be comfortable going out to a table service restaurant on a regular basis. On the other hand, 1/4 of Canadians say they will wait for a vaccine and 21% are not sure. So nearly half of Canadians don't know when they'll go out or will wait for a vaccine. So it'll be a long road to recovery, and table service restaurants will need to focus on takeout and delivery in the meantime. For caterers and drinking places, both have been hit by COVID hard, and it will take even longer for them to return to pre-COVID levels. In 2020, we are forecasting that caterers' sales will drop by more than 50%, while drinking places will fall 57%. These forecasts depend on several critical assumptions, most importantly that coronavirus vaccines will begin in early 2021. Once an effective vaccine is found, pent-up demand will boost domestic spending and international travel. Office workers and businesses in the downtown core will return to some form of new normal. However, delay in finding an effective vaccine would significantly lengthen the recovery time for the food service industry. In addition to this forecast, we assume that there will be no further national lockdown like the one in April. Another major lockdown would have a devastating impact on food service sales, and many operators would not be able to survive such a lockdown. At the beginning of the presentation, I used the analogy that the food service industry had basically fallen off a cliff. We were a $93 billion industry dedicated to serving millions of people every day, and COVID-19 has pushed the industry to the brink of collapse. Much like a rock climber, many food service businesses are holding on for dear life as we try to climb our way back. In the past 6 months, we've seen restaurants pivot to try to adapt to the situation. Whether it's meal kits, groceries, ghost kitchens, new menu items, we will need continued government support to get back on our feet. One thing I've learned over the past 25 years is that the food service operators are incredible innovators. I know that you are in a fight of your life right now to stay afloat, but with sheer will and determination, we'll emerge a better and stronger industry. It will also be a different industry, and I'm not sure anyone can say for certain what it'll look like. We'll need to return to the top of the mountain, and it will be a new beginning. And there will be a new normal. We will survive and we will succeed. And Restaurants Canada is here for you through this. And this research, what I've shown you today, is part of what we are doing for restaurant operators. Then here's just some of our research tools that we put out on a regular basis. Restaurantscanada.org is our website. And this is the link I referenced about how to re-engineer your menu. And I talked way too much. I know that's a lot of data and it goes on and on and on, but I hope to answer any questions if you have any.
Merci beaucoup, Luc. Je pense en célébrant vraiment la semaine de la PME 2020, c'est apparent que c'est plus important que jamais d'appuyer nos entreprises en région. Thanks again, Luc. I think more than ever, it is so critical as we kick off Small Business Week 2020 for us to consider the importance of supporting local. It is more important than ever and obviously a key to survival for certain industries within our business communities. So that being said, we want to thank you for your presentation, and let's look forward to certainly what 2020 and 21 can bring to the industry.